But first, the main attraction of the slot, and finally, I'm going to actually announce him. Everyone give a warm round of applause to Mr. Roman.
Thank you very much. Okay, I actually have to admit that I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed now because I have the feeling that the last 2 years, I spent the last 2 years in a small room, like my home office, and Interstellar suddenly started to make sense to me, but I'm very happy that this is now over. We saw some cat pictures before, so now I have to show a dog picture. It's actually our dog. She's called Pina. I really love this dog, but she's eating my socks, which is not that cool. Anyway, my name is Roman. I'm from Vienna, from Austria, so actually for me it was only a 4-hour train ride to come here. I studied business administration, but also computer science. So I'm not an expert coder. I'm not an expert marketing guy either. I try to work at the crossroads of IT and business, and that's what I did for the last years. So after lunch sessions are always very hard. It's very hot now. I feel like Pina and my dog. I feel like sleeping. Actually, I have to complain about 2 things at this conference, and I want to use the power of the stage to do that. First thing is, there's too much food. The second thing is, it's way too delicious. So, yeah, that's how I feel. I now work at Graphmasters, which is a small startup from Germany, like 50 people startup. But before that, I worked at an automotive software supplier called Electrobit, and I joined 2018, and that's where I noticed the problem. So we had the problem of delivering our product in time with the quality that it was expected for, and to deliver this value. And we had some impediments. So we had some long development cycles, high workload, so there was a lot of stress. The priorities started to change, or they changed all the time. And when I joined, I noticed that building and deploying our software and testing it, actually there was some hardware involved, so it was kind of difficult to test it. But still, it took more than 24 hours. So if you did something today in the afternoon, you would only get feedback 2 days later sometimes. And then this led to decreasing developer morale. It was very hard. But I thought, coming from a startup background, so I was the CTO of a 40-person startup in Vienna, and I joined this company. And I thought, OK, I know what to do. We just have to fix the deployment pipeline, right? Like, I'll set up some time-stamper plugins in the Jenkins they use, and I check what takes a lot of time. And I was able to, or we were able to cut the build time into 1/3 by a few months, just by looking into it and using faster machines. And then we also automated the deployment, and we introduced some new technologies like Docker, so we containerized everything, and we moved from SVN with a lot of sub-SVN repositories. We moved to a monorepo, and this made everything so much easier. And I thought, yeah, now everything is nice, right? But I was still asking myself this question after putting all these hours into improving our deployment and our technology. I was still asking the question, so what? Are we now really moving faster? And I found out that this is actually, for me at least, it was very hard to answer. So now you can, I'll talk about the journey and what I learned from this. So the first thing that we wanted to achieve is to bring back this fast physical feedback and visualize all our work. I think I first read about it in this 2007 book from Michael Nygaard. It's called Release It. I think there's now the second edition of it came out last year. It was a very, very good book. And he's writing about, I think he calls them ambient displays. So an ambient display is something that uses cues, just like sound or smell or rocket launchers, USB rocket launchers, to visualize the state of a system and make the things that are happening in the computer world visible in the physical world. And this really helps in a way that you put these things in a very prominent place. So it also displays that you, as a team, you don't have anything to hide. Like for example, the status of your build is always visible to everyone. And if a lot of people have to pass, and if something is off, it's visible, or it will be seen. It also starts some interesting discussions. So I had collected all the data that I wanted to visualize in some of these ambient displays, or they are also called extreme feedback monitors or machines. And I had already collected the data for our weekly meetings, but I wanted to have this automated way of showing that. So in 2019, we moved from one office to another office, and I started working there. Like, I moved my stuff, and we had some logistical company moving our desks and seats and everything. And I didn't even have a desk to put my laptop on, but still had to work. So we had some logistical problems, like how it always is, I guess, if you move. And I had some time at my hands to play around with something that I used in the past. It's called smashing. It used to be called dashing. So smashing is the successor of that. It was, I think, originally it was developed by Shopify, I think. Maybe today I would build it with Grafana, but whatever, something that I knew. And I had a spare Raspberry Pi that I got from IT because they canceled the project, and I was able to use this. And based on the metrics I collected, I wanted to visualize a few things. So what I did, this is a photograph of like the first version of the dashboard that I created. It's nothing special. So in the right upper corner, you see the upcoming milestones. So I visualized some, I don't know, parties and releases and stuff. And then also our main builds from master. And then we had a build that created our tests. I already mentioned that we had a lot of hardware involved, and then running these tests. And also how many tests failed and what's the expected time of it. What I also did is I visualized the state of our Jira project. So basically what you see here is there are 8 tickets scheduled, 56 in progress, down 3%, 27 tickets in review. And important part is tickets that are done but not released, but I'll come back to that. I also measured connected to GitHub to measure the age of our open pull requests and whether this goes up and down. And we also measured the open support requests and for our hardware queue and for our software development. Given that I started there as a project manager, for me this was like the cockpit of the project. So every day I looked at this, and I didn't have to check all the individual software systems to see what the current status is. But this is when I noticed the problem. And the problem was we were creating too much inventory. So I already mentioned it, but I saw the number of tickets that were done. So they were closed in Jira, but they were not in a released version of it, a released version of our software. This number increased every day. And I thought about this because no one was really talking about this problem. Like, it became so evident that we're creating a lot of stuff, but it's not creating any value because it doesn't make the way to customer fast, right? Like, we don't get any feedback. My first job, actually, after university was I worked in parcel logistics. And the interesting thing, if you work in logistics and something doesn't work, then suddenly a lot of parcels and shipments, they just start to pile up, right? Like, and you cannot ignore that fact. But in IT, if you have a lot of tickets, but they never get released, sometimes that's not that visible. So there's an interesting book. It's called Making Work Visible, and it also makes this point that if you have cornflakes, if Nestle produces cornflakes and you can buy it in the shop, it only provides value once the consumer buys it and gets his hands on these cornflakes and is able to eat it. And it's very similar to the things that we were developing, right? Like we have 263 patches of features or hotfixes or whatever that were deemed done, but not done, right? Like they were done, but not released. But given that this number, so we had invested a lot of stuff in improvement, and this number was increasing. And it was increasing faster and faster, which made me a little bit nervous. But actually, I thought, OK, we fixed one bottleneck, so now the bottleneck is shifting to something else. And the question was, how can we measure that? And it really made click in my hand when I read this Twitter post from Jess Humble. He's the guy who wrote the continuous delivery book, or one of the authors, also the author of the Accelerate book. And he says, so he's talking about the presentation of Edwin Cockcroft, but the interesting thing is this screenshot from the Accelerate book. And he says, if your team is working, like if you have a cross-functional team, it's working in two domains at the same time. And one is product delivery, like the right-hand side of this table. And it says that you have to have this low variability, click of a button, releases are non-event kind of setup. But on the other hand, your team is also working in the product design and development domain, meaning they're doing new things, they have to estimate stuff, and the estimates are highly uncertain and the outcomes are highly variable. The interesting thing that he says is you have to start with fixing the product delivery setup, like the build, test, and deploy, to make sure that you then can enter a paradigm where you can do this experimental approach of development. Because it doesn't really help if you're able to develop very fast, but you're not able to ship it. So that gave me hope, because I thought, OK, at least we fixed the build and testing side. So I was interested, what about the product delivery? Can we measure that as well? But let me first look at the product delivery metrics first. Exactly. So if we look at the Accelerate book and also the DORA research State of DevOps report, we see that there are like 4 DORA metrics, they're called, that you can use for measuring the delivery side of things. So you can measure, and I think that's not news to you, so you can measure the lead time of your code changes from check-in to deploy, also the deployment frequency, the change fail rate, so how many times do you have to roll back, and also the time to restore. So if something goes wrong, how much time does it take you to fix it? And the interesting thing is that they say in the Accelerate book and also in this DORA report that these are not trade-offs. So the companies that they put in the elite group in their study, they manage to have lower lead time and higher deployment frequency and higher quality and lower errors. So it's not a trade-off between these metrics. So I had the feeling that we kind of were on the right track. So I wanted to know more about the product design and development domain and how to measure that. So at this time, I was reading a book. It's called Project to Product from Mike Kirsten. And he comes up with this flow framework. So how can you measure what you do? And he says, basically, there are 4 types of flow items, 4 types of work. So everything you do somehow fits in one of these categories. One is features, one is defects, one is risks, and the last one is debt. And then you can measure, you can use all your existing product, like your software delivery, CI/CD pipeline, artifact stuff, to get the data about these things. And then you can measure 4 different flow metrics that they define. And one is flow load. So what is the number of flow items that are actively being worked on? That's more or less work in progress. Then flow time, how long does it take for this item to being accepted? It's always a discussion, when does the clock start, to being delivered. So when does it reach the customer? Flow efficiency, it's the proportion of time the flow items are actually worked on to the total time elapsed. And flow velocity is the number of flow items done in a given time, which is also referred to as throughput. What's also very interesting is that they look at flow distribution. For example, you can look at the things that are currently being closed or worked on or in a specific state. And the nice thing about this, if you think about product management, if you go to your product manager and say, okay, if you have 100 points, how would you distribute them between features, defects, risks, and debts? And then at a specific point in time, you look at your current flow distribution and go to your product manager again and say, you said we should work 50% on features, but actually we're working 20% of features. So something is wrong, right? We have to do something about it. So I created another dashboard where we measured the current flow load, the flow time, the flow efficiency, and this flow distribution, and also the flow velocity. What I also really liked about this book is that they say that you have to measure these flow metrics, and then you have to correlate them to business results. So for example, what's the value that you deliver? How much does it cost? How big is what's the quality of your deliverables? For example, how many escape defects do you have? And the very, very nice thing that I liked in this book is that they say you also have to look at developer happiness or team happiness. And there's a way to do this, for example, by looking at your employee net promoter score. Or you can measure culture with surveys. If you have the time, I will also talk briefly about that. So I set up this dashboard. Actually, I had a big number of dashboards because I'm a visual guy. And we had this release. And releases should be non-events, but in our world, it was still a big event, let's say. So we released it, and I remember I was going into the hallway where we had this dashboard, and I looked at it, and I saw something very strange. We were shipping more often, but due to the fact that we didn't deploy from master directly, but rather from a release branch, on average, we got slower. So what we did by creating all our improvements is we created something like a shortcut for fixes. So we were able to really fast deploy hot fixes and patches, which we also then backported to master branch or to the release branch. But it still took us too long to deploy these bigger features. So we looked into our release cycles and wanted to cut it more and more, but it always felt like we were running or trying to run faster and faster, but not arriving anywhere. And I had to think about this one scene in Lewis Carroll's book, Through the Looking Glass, and what Alice found there. And in this book, Alice is running with the Red Queen, and she says, in our country, Alice says, in our country, you generally get to somewhere if you run very fast for a long time, as we've been doing. And the red queen says something very interesting. She says, "My dear, here we must run as fast as we can just to stay in the same place. And if you wish to go anywhere, you have to run twice as fast." But then I thought about it and said, okay, we will never be able to run fast enough. And I did some additional reading, and I found something that I liked a lot. So this is from a book from Klaus Leopold. It's also mentioned by Jonathan Smart in his Sooner, Safer, Happier book. If you look at dev, right, like we're here, and we're really trying to improve everything we're doing, developing faster, shipping faster. But then if you look at to the left, and you think about what's happening, and how often are these things happening. For example, how often is the product manager thinking about ideas? And then maybe even, especially in a big company, like the company I worked in, you maybe have some steering boards, and the steering boards are only held quarterly, and then they have to wait for approval because they need budget, and budget something that typically happens quarterly as well, or annually. And then you have a product backlog, and you have to do some analysis, and the dev backlog. And as soon as it reaches the dev stage, it's already urgent. And I had this feeling, that's why I really like this picture. Like our dev team, we were trying to improve everything, and we felt so freaking agile, right? But still, the whole company or the whole process that we were part of was not agile, right? So after dev, of course, you then have integration and acceptance and release. So there are a lot of things mentioned like that. For example, I think Jess Humble calls it water scrum fall, because you're still in something like a waterfall process, but you are in the middle of, you're doing this scrummy thing, which doesn't really change a lot because the time that you're spent in dev is just a very small part of the whole story. So I often heard this difference between agile development and business agility. So this picture really drove it home for me. I really like that. So I found out that in the team that I was working, we had limited system focus, and we didn't really even know what happened before and after we finished our work. So we had to move to another powerful tool, which is called value stream mapping. The interesting thing is we're always talking about process improvement. So for example, if you have one process step, you look at this process step in very much detail, and you try to improve these things. But value stream mapping has a different focus. So it looks at the whole value stream, meaning that you have an idea, and at the end you deliver value to the customer. And as I said before, process improvement is looking inside the boxes, and value stream mapping is about focusing or identifying the bottlenecks or time wasted between these boxes, which oftentimes has a higher leverage. So if you create something, typically you have to do certain activities, and you can split them up in two main types. One is value-adding activities, and the other one is non-value-adding activities. And you actually want to get rid of the non-value-adding activities, but you might not be able to do that because even though they add cost and might look like waste, there might still be some organizational reasons or some, for example, auditing or documentation things that do not directly increase the market value, but you still have to do them. So what I want to say is the goal is to eliminate most of these non-value adding activities, then minimize the things that are non-value adding, but you cannot get rid of for whatever reason, and then optimize the value adding activities. And it led me to another epiphany, which is that we needed to change the way we work. So how this works is you try to create a value stream map of the current process. You do the Gamble walk, so you go to the developers or the people that actually do the work. And the thing is, you do not describe how it should be, or like you do not describe how the documentation says that it's currently done, but you try to document the way it is actually done right now. So you try to come up, and you have like a bird's eye view, right? Like come up with 5 to 15 of these process steps of developing value to the customer. And you then collect key metrics for all these steps. For example, how many people work there, what's the lead time, what's the process time of this step, and also what's it's called the percent complete and accurate, which means that how many times someone, like a previous process, hands over something to the next process, but if you have to do some rework, then this ratio will decrease. The interesting thing is you don't only document the current status, you also try to come up with a future status and create some Kaizen bursts. It's coming from Toyota, of course. So you try to create the minor increments that are necessary to move from the current state to the future state. And that's really powerful. So one thing that I learned from this is, even though you know everything, all your problems, right? You're always discussing with your colleagues about the same problems, and they're asking you, yeah, why are we not doing this? And then you say, yeah, because we have to do this first. And then they ask you again, okay, but why are we not doing this? Yeah, because this is connected with that, and we have to do this and that. And the interesting thing that I really liked is, even though everyone knows about all the problems, it's very, very helpful if you have like this 2 A4 paper view of these issues. And what you then do with that, you don't put it on the wall and send an email and say, okay, we finished this value stream mapping thing, and that's the future state. Please fix all the issues. But you have to socialize these maps. What does it mean? You sit down with the people involved in doing the work, and you take them through the process, or some of them might have already been part of this mapping exercise, but not all, of course. So you talk them through this value stream map and all the problems that you identified, and they provide feedback, and maybe you identify something more. But what was very, very powerful, what we did is we created a survey. We used all the improvement ideas. We randomized the order of the items that were shown. And for each of these items, we collected 2 metrics. One is, what is the effort to implement? So we provided a short description of the thing, and maybe also a potential solution how to do it. What's the effort to implement with the options? I don't know. The effort is low, or the effort is high, from a 1 to 5 scale. And we did the same for what's the impact, actually. So what's the anticipated benefit? Again, I don't know, or 1 to 5 scale. And if you do that, then you came up with something which is called a pace prioritization. And you can create this chart. So you have anticipated benefit low to high, implementation effort. I skipped the scale. I flipped the scale here so that the priority things on the top right. So the priority things are the things that have a very high anticipated benefit, but are deemed very easy to do. And the nice thing about these is you could probably just do them, right? Like if you agree that you work on these just do it things, then maybe you just can sit together, take some days, and try to fix something from the list. And you start with the one on the very top right. And once you've done all the priority things, you might have to look in the things where an action is necessary. They are called action items because maybe you have to do some more planning to do them. And we use that we used that to create a list that I called like the one list to rule them all. So we had so many ideas or so many initiatives to improve something. But I always refer to this list. Like if it's on the list and if it's in the priority section, we should first try to fix the priority items and then maybe do the action things. And these consider and eliminate things. Sometimes you're waiting for this big rewrite that's very high effort. And you think that there's a very high anticipated benefit, but it's somewhere in the lower left side of this chart. So maybe it might make more sense to do the low-hanging fruit first, right? So coming back to the original questions, are we really moving faster? So this was the question that I wanted to answer for myself. We already knew that having these 2 to 3 big releases every year, like call them feature releases, didn't really make much sense. And this also shows in the numbers, where you see that we, in February 2021, we managed, and what you see here is a histogram of the flow time. So how much time does it take a ticket to go from in process to shipped in a released version? And if you look at these numbers, you actually see 2, let's say, clusters. One is the things that had a very, very short flow time, so between 0 and 19 days or between 20 and 39 days. And if you look at, when I looked at these items, that were mainly our patches. So our patches we created a lot of patch releases, given that we had fixed our build pipeline. But then you still had this second cluster, like the main, the biggest number of tickets, if you sum them up. And they had like, the second peak here is like 120 days of flow time. And if you think about it, this actually makes sense. When we had 3 releases a year, that's on average the flow time. So looking at these numbers, it was clear that we had to release more often, but not release more patch releases, but actually move to trunk-based development. So we said, okay, we want to release every month. And everyone said that's not possible. But we said, let's just try it. And the first one, like switching to these 3-month releases, or every 3-month releases to this 1-month thing, was very, very painful. But it's like described in this continuous delivery book, if something is very painful, you have to do it more often. It's like if you go to the dentist every 10 years, that's gonna really, really, really hurt. But if you go there every 6 months, it's only small things that you might have to get fixed or whatever, and it might not hurt that much, or not at all. So 4 months later, we looked at these numbers again. And there's still some overlap, so we're looking at the last 6 months. There's still some overlap with the last analysis, but what you see is now that the main number, or the highest number of tickets, that now is nicely fitted in this 30-day range, which nicely fits to our monthly cadence. So there's still a big long tail also because we were able to work on some very, very old tickets. But we were now able to answer this fundamental question that I raised 2 years ago. So are we really moving faster and being able to get faster feedback, learn quicker, reduce the risk, monetize earlier, and maximize outcome? Yes, finally, we can answer this question. We are. So what's the final step? So we succeeded in making this change, but I think the hardest change is changing the culture of the company. And there's a very nice book from Dr. John Koller, and he comes up with this 8-step process of doing change or leading change. So you create a sense of urgency, saying we have to change something. Then you find some people like a coalition, small coalition, say, okay, let's go for it. You form a strategic vision, and then you find out, okay, we have this vision, but we cannot do it ourselves. So you have to find this volunteer army. Then you have to enable change by removing barriers. You generate some short-term wins. So you might not want to tackle the biggest problems, but rather go for the quick wins. Then you sustain this change by using the time that you won to do more change and accelerate. And then finally, you have to institute the change. And that's very difficult. But we had some really nice progress a year ago. We started to do book clubs in the company, and we're discussing books like the Phoenix Project or the Unicorn Project. And that's really nice if people that came to our project and or then read this book and they say, okay, now I understand what you're trying to do, and it's not something that you came up with, but actually a lot of companies have the same problems. We are just trying to tackle them in an intelligent way. So in summary, making work visible allowed us to find out that we were creating too much inventory. Visualizing flow made me realize that we will never be able to run fast enough, and we should not even try. We have to involve people that are to the left or to the right of our value stream to speed up. And value stream mapping really helped us to understand that we have to change the way we work, right, and to reach this future state of collaboration. And only these three things made us move faster. And instituting change is the final step. So if you want to know more, I really urge you to read these books or listen to the talks of some of these authors. I created or open sourced the code of the dashboard that I created. It's not very nice. It runs on a Raspberry Pi. I put all the heavy lifting on Jira, but still might be interesting to look at it. I have a blog where I write about these things, and you find some more technical details and a lot of additional references. And of course, there are professional tools to do such things. And if you want to have a good overview, there's now a thing called Value Stream Management Consortium, with all the industry leaders talking about what they are doing. So if you want to do anything more serious and not use the random code from me, look at these informations. So finally, I have to say thank you. Pina is happy now. Thanks for listening. Thanks for coming to the talk. Thanks to the organizers. Thanks to the sponsors. Thank you. Woo!
Look at that. First question was show more pictures of Peanut, and you did exactly that. I'm afraid, guys, we're not going to have time for any of these questions because we have to give you away prizes. But, Roman, you'll answer the questions if people come across you down the left-hand side of the stage, right?
Of course.
Absolutely. What a generous guy. A round of applause for him again. Here's some free booze.
Thank you.